Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at the top 10 rock double albums of all time. Double albums are something of the marmite of the music world. I think some people love them, some people hate them. The naysayers think that they're sort of bloated and indulgent and there's too much filler. And people who love them think that it's that indulgence that makes them so attractive, that you really get into the nooks and crannies of an artist's creativity. They love just the sheer amount of music on offer. I think the truth is sort of somewhere in between the two. Now, if you've come here expecting to see Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life on this list, you're going to be disappointed. Not because it's not a brilliant album. It is. It's an absolutely stunning record. And if you don't know it, you must go and check it out now. But this is Rock Records Reviewed, and I have to stay true to the title of the show. So as much as I'd love to have put it in, and it would be very near the top too, I'm not going to. There are some other caveats to the show today. I'm not going to release anything that didn't come out originally as a double vinyl album. Lots of albums that came out on CD were retrospectively put onto vinyl and had to go onto two discs and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not going to include those. I'm going to include records that were released in the spirit of a double album originally. Also, I think that a lot of these records are not going to be surprises to you. I've covered them in other shows, and I've gone into the minutiae and the musicians and where they were recorded and things like that. I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to really try and capture the overall vibe and spirit of these records, and sort of steer clear of stuff I've covered before, and hopefully make a case for their inclusion in here and why I've put them where I have. Anyway, look, let's get into it. So at number 10, I'm going to put, from 1973, The Who's Quadrophenia. This is a concept album about Jimmy, who's kind of an errant youth struggling to find out where he belongs in the world. What I love about this record, it really acutely sort of captures the working class suburban malaise of a young teenage boy who's sort of trying to be someone or be part of something. The sort of grey, monotonous artwork really echoes the kind of 60s era where the album is set. But also that kind of urban dreariness of a small pocket of northwest London. Just before psychedelia kicked in and everything became more colourful. The songs, of course, are great. The Real Me, 515, I'm One, Love, Rain on Me, Punk and the Godfather. They're all great songs in their own right, but they're all even more powerful as part of the narrative. The production is really strong and powerful. And overall, I think this album leaves a sort of a bleak aftertaste, but it's very, very memorable and affecting, I think. At number 9, from 1977, ELO's Out of the Blue. ELO, of course, headed up by Jeff Lynne, the sort of prolific Beatles-inspired melody man. And apparently he wrote this album in 3.5 weeks. Now, a lot of people have in the past accused ELO of being a bit too slick, a bit bland, perhaps even a bit soulless. I think they've been reappraised a lot in the last few years. I mean, that's nonsense. I mean, the real beauty and heart of these songs is in their craft and in their melody. And if you can't hear how deeply Jeff Lynne loves music and harmony and those sort of things, then I don't think you're listening right. Turn to Stone, Slow Down, Sweet Talking Woman, Mr. Blue Sky. These were all the big hits. The truth is he could have chosen 3 or 4 or 5 other songs that would probably have been just as big a hits, because they're all packed with all those things we love. Great rhythms, beautiful craftsmanship, orchestration, melody, all those things. And I think this album really sort of feels like a bit of a rich chocolate box of treats when you listen to it. At number 8, from 1972, Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. So famously, the Stones decamped to Nelcott House in the south of France with a mobile recording studio. So you had the drums in the basement, and you had the guitars on the landing, that kind of thing. And you had the feel. You get the feel there was a real sort of open house policy for all sorts of hangers-on and ne'er-do-wells. And the vibe seems to have sort of energized the band. You know, the sessions are sort of really sprawling and loose. And more than ever for the Stones, that tightness is forsaken sort of for feel and atmosphere. You've got country, blues, gospel, rock and roll, soul music. I think it's really Charlie's drums and Jagger's sort of lush delivery that really drive this record. And they sort of tie it all up into what is a Stones classic. That vibe carries the album through the weaker songs. I mean, you have got Sweet Virginia and Tumbling Dice and Happy and Shine a Light and all those sort of things. Some songs are more kind of just ideas and sketches and grooves, but it all works. And, you know, in the context of the album, and you do feel that this is one of those albums you kind of need a shower after listening to. Number 7 from 1966, it's Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde. Now, this is often regarded as one of the greatest albums ever made, let alone double albums. And I can see that. I like it less than some other Bob Dylan albums, not least the two that preceded it, Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61 Revisited. I think they just have a little bit more focus for me. But, you know, there again, that's a contradiction because double albums by nature have to be a little bit more sprawling. You cannot deny the quality of the songs here. You know, I Want You, Just Like a Woman, Sooner or Later One of Us Must Know, Pledging My Time, Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat, Stuck Inside of Memphis. It's practically an album's worth just there. I've reeled off. This album's the very definition of that kind of wild Mercury sound, which is how Dylan famously described his music of this period. One critic called this eccentric blues revisionism. And I don't think I could have put it better. Dylan so often, and he still uses blues idioms and structures from which to kind of build his own lyrical landscapes. For me, that's the album's strength and its weakness. Because by the time I get to side 4, Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, I'm usually a little bit Dylan'd out. But that is not to say I haven't absolutely loved what I've heard before. At number 6, the 12th album by Fleetwood Mac, Tusk. Now, Tusk was really kind of for this lineup the third album. They'd done the Fleetwood Mac and then they'd done Rumours. This was, of course, with Lindsey Buckingham, Stevie Nicks. Rumours went stratospheric with sales and popularity. So how on earth do you follow up that? Well, you take a bit of time out and then eventually you decide to spend $1 million, snort a mountain of cocaine and take as long as possible doing it. And the sessions for this album were infamously torturous, tedious, exasperating, long days in the studio, sitting around doing nothing while Lindsey Buckingham's messing about with all sorts of experimentation, driving the band mad. Warner's record execs famously said they kissed their Christmas bonuses goodbye when they heard this record because they thought it was an absolute mess. I think this album, more than any other, has been really reappraised over the years, and now it's sort of considered the real sort of dark horse of the Fleetwood Mac canon and something of a classic. Lots of Fleetwood Mac trademarks are in here, of course. You've got sort of Stevie Nicks doing her sort of mooncalf bit on songs like Sisters of the Moon and Sarah. You've got Christy McVie with her sort of very plaintive, wistful brown eyes. But it's the Lindsey Buckingham stuff, really. The ironic thing is it's the really lo-fi, punky Lindsey Buckingham stuff on here is experimental things that are the real soul of this record. Not That Funny, Tusk, What Makes You Think You're the One, songs like that. These songs elevate the album from sort of a bloated curio into a genuine contender as the natural successor to the White Album as the definitive double record. You know, with the band fragmented and strung out, you know, they're all sort of digging deep into their own issues and musings to express their music so individually. Do you know, and it works. It really works. You know, this is the classic example of an album, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, I think. And number 5, from 1969, another Who album, Tommy. Tommy famously derived from Pete Townshend's Lifehouse project. And this really is one of the first pure concept rock albums about a blind, deaf, and dumb boy who becomes a messiah for a lost generation, sort of looking for leadership and guidance. There's a very, very clear narrative through this record. The songs and the lyrics, they almost read like a story. Townsend clearly at this point, he's exploding with creativity and invention, and you can hear it all over the record. One thing I love about it is very, very English, from the sort of lyrical content to the melodies, the bleak post-war Britain picture it paints through to the sort of saucy seaside holiday camp climax. There's a real sense of time and place on the record, and I love that. It takes you sort of into another world, and when you have songs as good as Pinball Wizard and Acid Queen, and We're Not Going to Take It Along the Way, along with the sort of band's really outstanding and inventive playing, it's an album I go back to quite a lot, Tommy, as I think I've said before. Number 4, from 1979, it's Pink Floyd's The Wall. Now, Roger Waters had on the previous Animal tour a spat on a fan in the crowd, and he'd done this out of just for disgust for the whole situation. He was aghast at his behaviour, and it dawned on him that the sort of barrier between performer and punter was widening, both sort of physically and psychologically. And it inspired him to write The Wall. And it's a concept album generally about a sort of rock star's descent into isolation and madness. The album got panned when it came out, especially by the sort of, the socialist enemy, left-wing, punk-loving press. Again, they said it was overblown and ridiculous. But do you know what? Great music will always win in the end, I think. And this album is just full of beautifully produced masterpieces. You've got Comfortably Numb, Another Brick in the Wall, Goodbye Blue Sky, Hey You, Nobody Home. There isn't a track on this album I don't really, really like. And that is saying something for a double album of 80 minutes. Gilmour, as ever, is on absolutely brilliant form, and Roger Waters, his writing was never more self-conscious than on this record, which is probably not a surprise given the subject matter. The final side, the controversial final side with the trial, it's bonkers, it's brave, and I think it's brilliant. I absolutely love it. I can't wait to get to that point on the album because it's so dramatic. Number 3. From 1970, it's Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs by Derek and the Dominoes, otherwise, as I'm sure you know, Eric Clapton. I'm sure you know the story. Eric Clapton was obsessed with George Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd, and he had professed his love to her in a beautifully written letter. And she met up with him, and one thing led to another. But she still wouldn't commit herself to him. She was still with George. And Eric was inspired by an Indian folk tale of doomed lovers called The Story of Majnun and Layla. And in a bid to woo her, he created what many people think as his masterpiece, the album Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, along with a crack band with Duane Allman writing Gunshot on guitar. The passion and the desperation in this music, I don't think it's ever been equaled. It's in his voice, it's in his playing. I think few artists have ever been as open on record, and actually in interview as well, as Eric Clapton. It's almost like he goes into the recording booth and gets a knife and just cuts open his heart and soul. And it just all comes out on the record. You can hear it in Bell Bottom Blues and Layla, of course, Have You Ever Loved a Woman, Tell the Truth. You can almost hear the guitars dripping with the pain of unrequited love. Did it work? Well, no, it didn't. She went back to George. But he did eventually win her over many years later. By that time, he was heavily in the throes of alcohol addiction. I'm not sure it was a very successful relationship for either of them, sadly. At number 2, from 1975, it's Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti. Led Zeppelin had three sides of music they loved. So rather than cut some music, they decided to go back into the vaults and they found some shorter songs and some little vignettes that they thought would help beef this album up into a double. So what you end up getting is a record that sort of spans the years and spans the styles, and that's crucial because I think the little musical things they added from before really lift this album. You've got sweet things like Bronny R, Boogie with Stew, and then you've got great little songs like Down by the Seaside and Night Flight, and they sit really, really well alongside Kashmir and 10 Years Gone and Trampled Underfoot. This, I've said before, this is a dense, tightly packed record. The sound, it's rich and it's treacly, and there's not a massive amount of air and space on it. It's dusty and it's downbeat, and it's kind of it sounds to me like an album made by slightly weary, serious men being weighed down by the gravity of the music, but somehow just through the sheer quality of the songs and the performances and the exuberance, they managed to make these songs take flight somehow. I've called this my favourite Led Zeppelin album, and every time I go back to it, I don't think I'm wrong. But number one. So look, if you know me, if you followed the shows and you've got this far, you probably might not be surprised to know that my number one double album is the White Album by the Beatles from 1968. Now, look, this isn't my favourite Beatles album, but I do think it's the perfect example of everything good and bad about a double album. In many ways, it's the archetypal double album. You know, people still argue about it. Should it have been condensed into a single album? I think that's kind of missing the point because, you know, it misses the point about what made the Beatles and ultimately their backstory so compelling and very, very bittersweet. You know, these four friends, their gang, they'd grown up together. And now they were sort of heartbreakingly drifting from each other, pulled apart by women, wives, diverse interests, you know, and really a contempt bred by familiarity, maybe. It's all there in the music. And I think rock's greatest coming of age finally had a soundtrack. So falling apart, they inevitably ended up recording a lot of this apart, and it ends up being it's a wildly diverse album because of it, with all the different personalities. Each member was free to indulge themselves and go off and record their own songs, often playing all the instruments on their own songs by themselves. This meant that for every sort of classic on here, like Back in the USSR, or While My Guitar Gently Weeps, or Blackbird, Helter Skelter, you're going to get something really, really crazy and off the wall, like Piggies, Rocky Raccoon, or Whisper It, Revolution Number 9. Some people hate these oddities. I find them fascinating, and they're a crucial mirror to who the Beatles were at this sort of desperate time in their careers. At the end of the day, the album still has more bona fide great songs and classics, far more bona fide great songs and classics on it than any other album on this list. If you don't believe me, you go and check it out. And if that isn't reason alone to put it on the top of the list, combined with the fact that it is the archetypal double album that we still talk about today as a double album and whether or not it should have been, means I couldn't have not put it at the top of this list. So I know a lot of you are going to be saying, so where's The River by Bruce Springsteen? Where's Electric Ladyland by Jimi Hendrix? Or London Calling by The Clash? All brilliant, brilliant records. But, you know, I did think very, very hard about this, and I had to just go with these 10 I chose. But I would love to hear your choices, and if there are any records I haven't mentioned that you think is a great double album, then write down below so we can all read it and discuss and argue. So look, that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you're new to any of these records, they're all great records. Don't hold back on any of them. Go and investigate. But I will see you again very soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Until then, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.